Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Rahul Mahajan, sociologist and author of Full Spectrum Dominance, U.S. Power in Iraq and Beyond. Hi, Rahul.
Hi, Sonali.
Turkey was rocked by several violent attacks over the weekend, highlighting growing tensions between the government and Kurdish groups. 4 police officers were killed in the southeastern part of Turkey from a roadside bomb. And in the same region, a soldier was killed when his military helicopter was fired on. The U.S. consulate in Istanbul was attacked as well by 2 female militants, one of whom was captured. The group Revolutionary People's Liberation Army Front took credit for the attack. The U.S. consulate has been closed for now. 2 years ago, the same group attacked the U.S. embassy in Ankara with a suicide bomber. Several other attacks on police and military headquarters took place over the weekend. Kurdish leaders are claiming that the Turkish government is protecting the Islamic State on its border with Syria. Kurdish fighters have been on the front lines in the fight against ISIS. Well, Rahul, do you think these attacks are linked to Kurdish anger with the Turkish government and, by extension, the U.S. government over ISIS?
Well, Sonali, I want to emphasize that the DHKPC, the Revolutionary People's Liberation Party Front, is not part of the Kurdish movement. It is part of the non-ethnic based Turkish radical left. And they're totally acting on their own. I think there's a great danger with the Erdogan government reeling from election results in which for the first time a mass-based Kurdish party passed a vote barrier and is going to be represented in parliament, with the fact that they didn't themselves win a parliamentary majority, and with the growing role of Kurdish fighters in Syria against ISIS. I think there's a great danger that they're going to try to connect the broad-based Turkish primarily electoral movement with acts of terrorism. So the DHKPC was totally acting on its own. That said, it was, of course, sending a signal, and the timing something to do with the Turkish government's attacks on Kurds. But, of course, it also doesn't need specific incidents like that because it's been a long-time anti-imperialist organization.
Here in the United States, residents of Ferguson, Missouri, and other activists took part in commemorations of the first anniversary of the police killing of 18-year-old Michael Brown. On Sunday, Brown's father, Michael Brown Sr., led a march of activists through the streets of Ferguson to mark the moment his son was killed. Police largely remained away from the march. After the sunset, protests took a more militant turn, and at one point, police opened fire on an African-American man they say fired shots at them. 18-year-old Tyrone Harris Jr. was confirmed to be the victim of that shooting and was apparently a friend of Brown. He's apparently a friend of Brown. His father, Tyrone Harris Sr., told a local CBS channel that Harris Jr. was, quote, running away from the situation and police ended up shooting him, and that his son was unarmed. The young man has required surgery for multiple gunshot wounds. This morning, Attorney General Loretta Lynch, during her address to the Fraternal Order of Police's National Conference in Pittsburgh, strongly condemned, quote, the violence against the community, including police officers in Ferguson. Well, Rahul, has anything changed a year later in Ferguson other than a number of reports pointing to how bad the situation has been?
So now I think actually a lot has changed. And let's remember, we have to wait for all the facts that come out on these Ferguson incidents. But one thing that struck me about the initial reports was at least one police officer is quoted as saying, these weren't protesters, they were criminals, referring specifically to the people involved in gunfire, which is a way of saying that the Ferguson police, like most of the country, has been forced to acknowledge the legitimacy of the protests, and they're separating out protesters from anybody who is actually supposedly engaging in gunfire. I think, I think that right now we have a tremendous change in public opinion. We have the fact that incidents that nobody would have known about, like Sandy Bland's death in custody, are now major news and being investigated by national news organizations. We have the fact that prosecutors are actually coming out and starting to charge some of the police officers. And we also have a potential impending split in the labor movement, where other unions are saying police unions really aren't like us. So yeah, I think a lot has changed in public perception.
And after the news, we'll speak with Jody Armour about Ferguson and more. Finally, the world's most widespread seller of sugar-laden drinks, CocaCola, has been found to be conducting some controversial research into obesity and weight loss. The New York Times, in a report yesterday, concluded that Coke is, quote, backing a new science-based solution to the obesity crisis to maintain a healthy weight, get more exercise, and worry less about cutting calories. The company is backing a nonprofit organization called the Global Energy Balance Network, which claims there is virtually no evidence that a sugar-laden diet can cause health problems such as diabetes. For For several years now, there have been concerted and often unsuccessful efforts by cities and states to tax sugary sodas. Well, Rahul, this reminds me of the corporate efforts to fool the public on smoking and climate change. What do you think?
You know, if only I had known 20 years ago that all I needed to do was drink more Coke. It might
And
have made
exercise a lot.
apparently, yes. Yes, it's very much reminiscent of those. It's also, I'd like to point out that even if you somehow think that consumers in the United States have been bombarded with this stuff to the point where they're savvy that this is just a nonsensical marketing campaign, remember that these are campaigns that go to the entire world. In the global South, Nestle for decades had a very successful propaganda campaign against breastfeeding, with the result of the severe impact on infant health and mortality. Right now, the World Health Organization actually calls obesity a global epidemic, and a lot of the results of a campaign like this may actually be seen in other countries more than in the United States.
Rahul, thanks as always for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week.
See you now.
Rahul Mahajan is a sociologist and author of Full Spectrum Dominance, U.S. Power in Iraq and Beyond. This is Uprising. We'll be right back.